Moses went to Israel's judges and commanded they destroy anyone who indulged in depravity and sin. He understood that evil is something you have to actively root out. If you allow evil to go unpunished, it will fester and grow in communities. Left unchecked, it may even become difficult to distinguish good from bad, right from wrong.
This story contains adult themes. Viewer discretion is advised. Let's begin.
As the Israelites camped on the plains of Moab during their mass exodus from Egypt, Balak, king of the Moabites, schemed in secret with a Hebrew prophet, Balaam. With the help of their conspirators, the Midianites, they all watched closely as the Israelites started to turn on each other, lose their resolve, and fall into sin. Moses, unaware of Balaam and the Midianites' betrayal, watched in horror as his people yoked themselves to demonic deities through ritualistic sexual immorality and sacrifice. As the once feared people of God began to bow to other deities, they broke the covenant they made with God. And so, God began to turn away from the people he had sought to set apart in the world, and a fierce plague raged through the settlement. God did not choose to set the Israelites apart because they were such great people or morally superior to others. He had chosen them because of an unwavering promise made to their ancestors. He had chosen the least of people, slaves, to liberate from their unrest and turn into a great nation so they would inspire others to turn away from sin to the Lord. As God watched the Israelites choose other gods before him, he said to Moses, "Take all the leaders of these people and expose them in broad daylight before the Lord so that my anger may turn away from Israel." Moses went to Israel's judges and commanded they destroy anyone who indulged in depravity and sin. He understood that evil is something you have to actively root out. If you allow evil to go unpunished, it will fester and grow in communities. Left unchecked, it may even become difficult to distinguish good from bad, right from wrong. Once the people saw their neighbors and cattle falling to the plague, and the judges began to round up those who were sinning against the Lord, they wept as they remembered their covenant with God. Eventually the plague stopped, but not before it had killed 24,000 people in the camp. The Lord blessed those who didn't waver in their faith in him, and told Moses to treat the Midianites, who they had once considered allies, as enemies. It was then it was revealed to Moses, a people he had once lived and traveled with, had conspired to destroy Israel. Moses counted all the remaining people who still numbered in the hundreds of thousands and prepared for war. But it had been many years and many battles since the people had fled Egypt. Moses was now an old man. He knew his time was near. In solitude, Moses, atop a mountain, looked at the promised land from a distance. There, the Lord reminded him he would need to appoint his assistant Joshua as his successor, who would see the people to the promised land. Moses was told he would not make the journey there. With a quiet resolve, he descended the mountain and announced Joshua as his successor to the people. Once this was done, the Lord said to Moses, "Take vengeance on the Midianites. After that, you may rest." And so Moses told the judges to arm the fighting men, and they went to war against Midian and defeated the 5 Midianite kings. Among those destroyed was Balaam, the prophet who had betrayed God and his people for gold. The Israelites took all the Midianite plunder and destroyed the towns and people. They only spared those they could prove had not participated in the betrayal and seduction of Israel. In those days, it was common to destroy entire settlements once a victor was named during a war. Take, for example, the Vikings who colonized much of the north of England, utterly decimating their opponents, or the Aztecs who destroyed their enemies, men, women, and children, to prevent any potential for future uprisings. King Balak watched in terror as his plans and closest allies became undone. The Israelites had never planned to interfere with Moab lands due to their close history, but due to his actions, ignoring warning from God and scheming against God's people, he cursed his nation until its eventual destruction. But that's a story for another time.
The victory over the Midianites and their conspirators reinforces the importance of trusting in God's guidance and following his commands. Despite all of Balak's plotting, every action he took only accelerated the eventual downfall of his people. Balaam never got time to enjoy the spoils of his betrayal before he was put to the sword, and the Midianites ultimately paid the ultimate price for their betrayal and sinful practices. Why do you think God still punished the Israelites, even though they were plotted against? Why do you think God reminded the Israelites that he had not set them apart because they were such a great and noble people? Do you remember why God had promised that land to the Israelites in the first place? Finally, when God sent the plague amongst the people, what do you think it told the people about who was the ultimate authority? You've been listening to Verse to Flicks.